So you've selected Mexico as the country where you're going to move to. Congratulations. It's a beautiful country. You've gone to the consulate in the U.S., you've completed the application, met the financial requirements, and been given either your temporary or permanent residency stamp in your passport, and now you're on your way to Mexico. Of course, one of the first things you'll do is stop at the INM immediately after you cross the border. You'll fill out your paperwork there. You'll make sure that you present to the INM person your stamp. The INM person will give you a 30-day visa, and that's how long that you have to get to where you're going and begin the second part of the process at the INM office in whatever city you're going to. And then you'll be on your way. But once you're in Mexico, your life is going to look a lot different than it did in the U.S. or whatever country that you came from. Maybe you've just retired. Like me, I retired a week later. We were on our way to Mexico, so life was going to look a lot different. But you'll get to wherever it is that you're going to start your journey in Mexico. In our case, it was Morelia. We had already contacted a facilitator beforehand, and we'd made arrangements to meet with her. And then she took care of our paperwork at the INM office in Morelia. And we highly recommend that if you're not pretty fluent in Spanish, hire a facilitator to get that work done for you. It'll just be so much easier. You'll do all your INM work. You'll get a CURP number, CURP, which is basically a population identifier number. And then you'll have that part of the process complete. And then from there, you'll be able to really enjoy Mexico, travel around, visit different places. I mean, that's just part of the magic of Mexico is there's so many different places to visit. Now, when Paulette and I came to Mexico, we elected to start out in Morelia, and we knew that we were going to stay there for 1 year. That was going to be our plan. We'd stay a year in one place, a year in another place, and keep going like that. Versus some people that come to Mexico, they finish up their work for either the temporary or permanent visa, and then they'll travel around, a month here, a month there. Paulette and I really wanted more of a home base. So we decided that Morelia was going to be our first home base. And from there, we did travel around quite a bit. And we enjoyed our travels and still do. But we always knew that Morelia was just going to be the starting place. Nothing against it. Morelia is a beautiful city. We just knew that it was going to be our starting place and that we would eventually move on from there. Our next stop was San Luis Potosi, and little did we know that this was going to be our place where we were going to live out our lives and make it a permanent home here, and then visit different places in Mexico and travel from here. That was not really our expectation. We figured we'd spend a year in San Luis and then move on to another city, but the longer we were here, the more we realized that this was pretty much what we were looking for in an area to live in. It's got all of the modern conveniences. It's about a one-day drive to the border if we decide to go back to the U.S. Very convenient. It's a larger city, about 1 million people in population, not a big expat community, which is what we wanted. For those of you looking for an expat community, San Luis Potosi is probably not the place. You'll want to look at, the other places, Chapala, Ajijic, San Miguel de Allende, and we've been to all those places too. And I do have to say that San Miguel de Allende is a beautiful city, though small. So we decided to eventually, after being here about 6 months, to go ahead and purchase a house, which we did. And I want to warn you about some things here. The house we purchased was new. We talked to the contractor quite a bit. Paulette and I really looked the house over. Things basically seem to be in pretty good shape. We pointed out a few things to the contractor, most of which he fixed, or at least attempted to fix, but not all. My advice to you is if you're going to buy a house in Mexico, have some independent inspector come and look at the house and tell you, what might be wrong with it. This is a new house. We weren't expecting that much wrong with it, but in retrospect, there are some things that need to be done. And windows aren't that great. They're single pane windows, which is pretty standard in Mexico. The problem is that they leak. But I will tell you that even in new construction here or old construction, water intrusion is always an issue here. You have to make sure that the house is properly sealed. There's a lot more maintenance that goes into it in terms of that, because cement is porous. That's what these houses are made of. Water will get into the cement and it will leak, and eventually it will come out somewhere in one of your walls, and it can be difficult to actually trace back where the original leak came from. So that's why I say whenever you paint, make sure that you put down a good coat of the sealer first, especially when you're in the rooftop area. And just make sure that you can do as good a job as you can to keep water out of your house. It's never going to be perfect. It'll always be an issue. Again, whether it's a new house or old house. But so we've been working through that. And, there are some maintenance things in Mexico on houses that you just aren't used to having to do in the United States. As an example, our metal gate in front of our house, there's such a thing as gate maintenance there, where you have to, oil the tracks or grease the tracks every 6 months to a year. And that becomes pretty important. Now, the house buying experience here in Mexico is different too. There is no such thing as a escrow company after you've agreed on a price with the owner or the person selling you the property. You go to a notaria in the area where we live in the Central Highlands. They will do some paperwork. You'll pay a fee there anywhere from like 3 to 10% of the sales price of the house. They'll send some paperwork off to the government in Mexico City, where they will determine whether you can buy the property or not. And if there's two people buying the property, you both have to qualify. So that's a little different than it is in the U.S. Now, a notaria will determine whether the person selling the house has the right to sell the house. They are attorneys. We had a friend who recently agreed to buy a house. They went to the notario. The notario determined that the person did not have the right to sell the house. They were not listed on the title. And so they will help you in that way. Now, if you're renting, obviously that's not so much of an issue. The problem may be is that landlords here aren't always on top of it, and things don't always get fixed right away. Which brings me to another point. If you find good workers that you're comfortable with, make sure you keep their phone numbers and keep in contact with them, because workers here, they'll show up, they'll say, I'll be here at a certain time, a certain day, and they don't show up at that time or that day even, and they don't even bother to call you to notify that they're not coming. So if you get a good worker, keep track of that person, because that'll come in very handy. Also, when you're new to an area, ask your neighbors, your friends you have in the area, if you have any, if they know people that can do stuff. And a lot of times they will know someone that they can recommend, and then the worker shows up to your house, you try him out and decide whether you like him or not. So that's important too, keeping track of people who do good work for you. The next thing, one of the next major things that we did was we bought a car, brand new. We had a Hyundai Elantra sedan that we drove here. We had it for 4 years, which is as long as we could have it, until Paulette went permanent. When she started out, she was temporary for 4 years. I was temporary for the first year and then went permanent after that. So we actually drove our car back to the U.S., sold it on Carvana, took the bus back here, and bought a new Hyundai Creta at a dealership. Now, this is another word of caution to you. When you're at the dealership, you have to ask a lot more questions there at the dealership. We looked at not the car, but a car like the one we were purchasing, because they didn't have any in stock. So we had to place an order for one, and you assume certain things, like it's going to come with tires, an engine, windshield wipers, a heater. Ours came with almost all of that. It did not come with a heater for some reason, and apparently that's also a thing here in Mexico, is they order cars without heaters in them, but we were not told that it didn't have a heater. And in San Luis, it gets cold in January and February, and you can't really drive a car without a heater in it around here. But we took delivery of the car, and then after we took delivery of the car, we discovered that it didn't have a heater in it, and we thought, well, maybe it will just heat up enough to keep the windows clear of frost. But nope. In fact, that car had no ability to have a heater, and that's the way it was designed and ordered. So we took that car back after about a month and a half. We originally paid like 486,000 pesos for it. We wound up having to sell the car back to the dealership, which they only gave us like 379,000 pesos. To sell it back, because they charge you a 16% tax that they pay to the government to buy the car back from you. So we kind of took it in the shorts on that one. We did, however, then find a car that was actually on the lot that had the color that we wanted. It was a step up in terms of like the security features, and it had a heater in it that we verified that it worked. So we wound up buying that car and paying a little bit more money for it. So that's another word of advice I want to give you, is when you're buying a car, ask a lot of questions. Ask if it's got, a heater, windshield wiper, stuff like that, because you just don't know. It's a different environment. And so that's another word of warning to you. However, if you're not going to buy a car and you're just going to travel by bus, and if you're not going to buy a home, you'll be renting. So you'll need to hook up with a real estate agent to show you some places. There are some real estate companies around, but they don't really have a great listing. There's nothing like an MLS here. So a lot of it is just actually word of mouth as far as rentals go. And you may either need to have someone co-sign for you for the lease of the house, or you may need a guarantor, which is what we had to do in Morelia and then here in San Luis Potosi. With a guarantor, basically you pay them a fee. I forget, it was like 1 month's rent in Morelia, and here it was about 3,500 pesos, I believe, for the guarantor. And then we signed a bunch of 1 month contracts, 12 of them. And then as we would pay each month, our landlord would give us back one of the papers that we had signed. The funny thing, they gave it to us out of order, basically. Sometimes we'd be paying January's rent and they would give us March's receipt. But as long as you're getting a receipt every time, you should be good to go. Now, that doesn't apply to people who are doing just like Airbnb. And of course, if you're moving every 3 or 4 weeks or so, that won't be of any consequence to you. However, people get tired of moving every 3 or 4 weeks. They have to either load up a couple of suitcases that they have, or we know people that have had a car and they have to pack up their car every time and go to another place. They wind up at an Airbnb that isn't suitable or not as advertised, and so that presents its issue too. And that was probably one of the reasons why Paulette and I decided, early on, that we just wanted to have a home base and travel out from there. So those are just some of the pitfalls that we've encountered. Now, another thing I want to bring up is Mexico they'll set up things that you have to get done by a certain deadline. Like within the last couple of years, they've started wanting everybody over the age of 18, whether they were national or hold a permanent or temporary visa of some kind, to get an RFC number. And originally they said you have to get it done by this date. And then that date just kept getting extended out because people weren't just going down to get their RFC numbers. Now, Paulette and I, we did that pretty much as soon as we could, because we like to be proactive about that kind of thing. But those dates, for most people, just kept getting extended. What I will tell you too is when you're dealing with government offices here in Mexico, the lines can be very long. But if you're over the age of 60, a lot of these offices will have shorter lines for senior citizens that you can go into. As an example, when we went to pay the registration on our vehicle, which, by the way, registration for vehicles that you buy in Mexico are due every January. So, as an example, if you buy a car in December, you pay the vehicle registration in December. Guess what? You'll be back in January to pay it again. So maybe that's why not a lot of people buy cars in December in Mexico. But those lines can be very long and very time consuming. We had waited in line for several hours at the Secretaría de Finanzas, and then I discovered that there was a line for seniors that was much shorter and moving faster. So then we got into that line and got our vehicle registered. But that whole process took, I want to say, about 5.5 hours to 6 hours by the time we got in line, till the time we walked out the door with all of our registration stuff. And it's it's that way at some government offices. It wasn't that way when we went to pay our property taxes. You just have to wait in line, and they don't care how old you are. And sometimes, if you don't get there early in the morning, it can take a few hours. Speaking of property taxes on our house, for those who are curious, because they accept our INAPAM cards for a discount and we pay in January, our property taxes are about 50% what they would be if we didn't have the INAPAM card and we did not pay in January. We pay last year was about $70 for the whole year for our property taxes, compared to I think around $3,800 we were paying when we were living in Sacramento, California. So there's quite a difference there too. So just keep that in mind if you're a senior. Ask to see if there's a line for seniors when you're in the government office. Another helpful hint is don't go shopping or to the bank on the 15th of the month or the 1st of the month, because the lines will be long. Because those are typically the two paydays in Mexico. And so try to avoid that if you can as well. And then the other thing is that, like me, as I said before, when we came to Mexico, I'd been retired for 1 week, and in that week, we were pretty busy packing up stuff, figuring out what we're going to take, what's going to get left behind. Ultimately, we brought a lot of stuff that we didn't really need because you don't know if that stuff is going to be available in Mexico. But pretty much everything is, with the exception, at least in my case, of shoes, because I wear a size 15 US. That's not very readily available in shoe stores here, but you can order them through Amazon Mexico, which I've done. And then it can be a little more difficult to find clothing for big and tall people like me. So I brought pretty much all of my wardrobe that I had at home. But we wound up bringing other stuff, pots and pans and stuff like that, which really we probably didn't need to do because you can find all of that stuff here. We also made 3 or 4 more trips back to the U.S. to pick up stuff that we had stored at our son's house and brought it back to Mexico. A lot of the stuff we didn't really need, but since we already owned it, we just put it in a car and drove it down. One thing I will tell you is that if you're thinking of buying electronics, buy them in the U.S. first. Take them out of the boxes so they don't appear to be new. And then bring them into Mexico that way unboxed, because electronics here are they can be prohibitively expensive compared to the U.S. An iPhone here will cost you more than they do in the U.S., as will computers, as an example. They actually cost more than in the U.S. So keep that in mind as well. And in those electronics, you should bring some good UPSs like APC or something like that. The electricity is here, they say it's 115 volts, but it fluctuates between 115 and 120. So you want to keep a good UPS with a battery backup to sort of regulate the current going to your electronics when you're charging them. As I said earlier in the video, your life will be very different here. It'll look a lot different. If you're just recently retired, you'll have more time on your hands. Having said that, Mexico at times can be frustrating. It's not quite as automated as things are in the U.S. in terms of paying bills and things like that, and dealing with some other stuff. The key is patience. You just have to have patience, and knowing in the end that things will work out. Paulette and I have been here about 5.5 years, and we've worked through just about everything that we need to work through. And you kind of get used to it after a while. Going to any office, government office, you're going to need your passport, your residency ID card, whether it's temporary or permanent. You're going to need probably a CFE bill with your address on it if you're trying to get some service set up with the government. CFE is the electric company here in Mexico. And so there are things like that. But just know, working with government offices, it takes time. You pretty much plan on spending a full day at a government office by the time you wait in line and get up to the front, and then try to work your way through your bad Spanish and maybe their poor English, but that's not really on them. It's on you to have better Spanish skills. And so, if you're dealing with a government office, try to take a Mexican friend if you can to help you through the process and make sure that you understand everything completely. That'll be a big help. Never underestimate the help of friends, and make sure you treat them good afterward, because they probably spent the whole day with you that they could have been doing something else. But that's just part of the thing about living in Mexico is, Mexicans are always more than happy to help you if they can. and they're always, so nice. That's one of the big cultural things is Mexicans are just nice people. They'll attempt to help you in whatever way that they can. If you, as an example, need some work done in your house or something, you need something done. If they don't do it, typically they know someone who does. But there are some environmental things like you may be hearing right now. Barking dogs is an example. That's a thing in Mexico. Everyone's got dogs and they all bark. Mexicans, originally I thought that they just love sound, whether it's barking dogs or car alarms or loud music or whatever it is. But after talking to some of my Mexican friends, they really just say they just accept it as a fact of life that things are louder here, and so they don't let, as an example, barking dogs bother them because they know that's just the way of life here. But that's something that coming from the U.S. that you may have to adapt to, is just the sounds are different here. You'll probably hear more sounds. So just be prepared for that. But enjoy your life here. Live it to the fullest. Visit several different cities. Each city has its sort of own unique identity, its own culture, its own culinary experience. Check them all out. Just learn to experience the unexpected here in Mexico. It's going to be different for sure. I want to also say that Paulette is not in today's video for two reasons. Number one, she's actually taking a nap right now, and secondly, she's had an operation that we're actually going to talk about in a future video, but she's still in recovery mode from that. But we're going to talk about that experience in a future video. So from now, it's Mark from the Two Travelers in Mexico. And I would ordinarily do what she did, but she's not here to blow the kiss. So I will just say, if you like what we're doing, we hope you'll consider subscribing to our channel, liking our video, commenting. Feel free to ask us questions about our life in Mexico, or if you have questions about what you should expect in Mexico, feel free to leave a comment and we'll be more than happy to get back to you on that. Until then, hasta luego.